3 Scary Carnival Horror Stories. The Clown Kidnapping. I loved visiting the carnival every year. It was a place of fun and excitement. However, this year was different. As soon as I entered the gates, a sense of creepiness washed over me. The clowns seemed to be looking at me more than usual. But I ignored it and continued further into the carnival. Suddenly, when I turned back, I noticed that one of the clowns had disappeared. I searched around but couldn't find him. As I stopped to catch my breath, someone put a cloth over my nose, and before I could react, I felt a stabbing pain. When I opened my eyes, I was in a dark room. The first thing I noticed was that I was not alone. The clown who had disappeared earlier was sitting there, staring at me. I screamed for help and tried to escape, but it was clear I was locked in that room. Days went past, and the clown never spoke to me. I saw him occasionally, but he never said a word. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned to months. I was starving and thirsty, and every day, my hope of escaping grew fainter. Suddenly, one day, the clown opened the door and threw food at me. I ate greedily, not knowing when my next meal would be. That's when I noticed there was something different about the clown. He was somehow younger than before and his face less wrinkled. I began to realize that this carnival was not of this world, and I was a hostage of its horrors. Years went past, and every day, I would see more and more people being kidnapped. The clown would come in, feed them, and then leave without a word. The years turned into decades, and the carnival began to crumble. Finally, one day, all the hostages were let go, but I was the only one with the memory of that cursed place, the only one who never forgot the horrors that happened inside those gates. Story 2. Crazed Man. I've always loved going to the carnival. The bright lights, the smell of funnel cakes and popcorn, the sound of laughter and screams from the rides. It's all so thrilling. But one visit to the carnival changed everything for me. I was walking down the midway, admiring the colorful booths and games, when I noticed something strange. There was a man walking around, muttering to himself and shaking uncontrollably. At first, I thought he might have been a part of an act, but the more I watched him, the more I realized that something was very wrong. As I continued to walk through the carnival, I noticed that the man was following me. He seemed to be getting more and more agitated, and I could feel his eyes on my back, watching my every move. I tried to keep calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Suddenly, the man reached out and grabbed me, pulling me into a nearby tent. I could feel his hot breath on my face as he began to scream and shout, ranting about all sorts of nonsensical things. I knew I had to get away from him, but I was trapped. I tried to scream for help, but it seemed like nobody could hear me over the noise of the carnival. I could hear the man's footsteps coming closer and knew that I had to act quickly. I ducked behind a stack of boxes and held my breath, hoping that he wouldn't find me. It felt like an eternity as I crouched there, listening to the man's footsteps growing louder and louder. I was sure that he was going to find me any second now. Then, suddenly, he stopped. I heard him groan and then he stumbled away from me, his footsteps disappearing into the distance. I waited a few more minutes before I cautiously crawled out from behind the boxes. I was shaken, but relieved to be safe. As I walked out of the tent, I noticed that the carnival had become eerily quiet. All of the rides had stopped, the food vendors had closed up shop, and everyone seemed to have disappeared. Then, I heard the sound of footsteps again. I turned around and saw the man, or what was left of him. He was covered in blood, his limbs twisted at odd angles. He groaned and shuffled towards me, his eyes wild. I knew then that I had to run. I sprinted through the deserted carnival, dodging the carnage that was everywhere. It was like a horror movie, with blood splattered all over the rides and lifeless bodies strewn about. Finally, I managed to escape the carnival and find help. But I'll never forget that day and the terror it brought. I learned that the carnival can be a fantastical place, full of wonder and excitement, but it can also be a place of unimaginable horror. Story 3. Clown Hideout. I always loved going to the carnival as a kid. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy filled the air, and the thrill of the rides was enough to give me goosebumps. Even as I grew older, I always looked forward to attending the annual carnival event in my town. This year, however, something was different. As I made my way through the crowded fairgrounds, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the pit of my stomach. Everywhere I looked, there were clowns. Clowns with painted-on smiles and fake noses, beckoning me to play their games and win their prizes. But something about them felt off, like they were hiding something sinister just behind their painted faces. As the sun began to set and the crowd started to thin, I found myself wandering towards the outskirts of the carnival. That's when I saw it, a small, unmarked trapdoor nestled between two tents. Without thinking, I pulled it open and peered inside. At first, I couldn't see anything. The room was pitch black, and the air was thick with the smell of grease paint. But as my eyes adjusted, I could make out the shapes of shadowy figures moving around me. That's when I heard the laughter, not the joyful, light-hearted laughter of the carnival goers, but a deep, throaty chuckle that sent chills down my spine. I should have run then. I should have bolted out of that room and never looked back. But something kept me there, something that whispered to me that I needed to see what was happening. As I crept closer to the figures in the darkness, I could make out the shapes of clowns, dozens of them, all clad in garish, mismatched outfits and standing in a circle around a small, flickering fire, and in the center of the circle was something that made my blood turn cold. It was a person, bound and gagged and wearing a clown costume that looked all too real. The clowns were prodding him with sticks and throwing firecrackers at his feet, and all the while they laughed and jeered. I wanted to run, to call the police and escape this twisted nightmare. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, watching in horror as the clowns tortured their victim. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The clowns picked up their things and disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with the trembling victim. I don't know how long we stayed there in the darkness, the two of us too scared to move. But eventually, we made it out of the carnival grounds and back to safety. I reported what I'd seen to the police, but nothing ever came of it. The clowns seemed to have disappeared without a trace, leaving me to wonder if what I'd witnessed that night had been real, or just a hallucination brought on by the carnival's twisted atmosphere. But deep down, I knew it was real. And even now, years later, the thought of that secret clown hideout still sends shivers down my spine. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider liking and subscribing to see more videos like this. By the way, I have a membership for only $7.99 a month and you can get awesome perks like members-only videos, posts and more. Have a good day or night.